Picture this: a city of unimaginable wealth, protected by towering walls that have stood for centuries, suddenly under attack. But here's the shocking twist: not by foreign enemies, but by those who were supposed to be allies. Welcome to Constantinople in April of 1204, where a sacred mission turned into one of the most brutal betrayals in medieval history. Imagine a glittering metropolis, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, a magnificent bridge between East and West. Constantinople wasn't just a city, it was the crown jewel of Christian civilization, a place where emperors walked marble halls and where extraordinary wealth and cultural sophistication met at a breathtaking crossroads of the world. The Fourth Crusade was meant to be a holy mission. Knights from across Europe had taken sacred vows to liberate Jerusalem, to fight against Muslim territories and reclaim holy lands. But something went terribly, terribly wrong. Instead of marching east to battle, these crusading knights would commit an unthinkable act. They would attack and sack their own Christian capital. How could this happen? What dark motivations could drive Christian warriors to turn their swords against fellow Christians? This is a story of ambition, of shocking betrayal, and of how greed can corrupt even the most sacred of missions. These weren't just ordinary soldiers. These were knights who had sworn holy oaths, who wore the cross and claimed divine purpose. Yet in 1204, they would reveal themselves as something far more complex, not heroes, but human beings driven by raw, uncontrollable desires for wealth, power, and revenge. Get ready to dive deep into one of history's most incredible and shocking episodes, a tale so unbelievable that if it weren't documented by countless historians, you might think it was pure fiction. A story of how a crusade meant to unite the Christian world ended up destroying one of its most magnificent cities. If you love uncovering the hidden mysteries of great empires, if you're fascinated by the complex drama of human ambition, then buckle up. The Medieval Archives is about to take you on an extraordinary journey into one of the most incredible betrayals in human history. But here's where our noble crusade takes its first dark turn. The year was 1202. Thousands of European knights had assembled with one burning mission: to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control. These were not just soldiers, but warriors who believed they were fighting a divine battle, each wearing a sacred cross sewn onto their armor. There was just one tiny problem: money, or more precisely, the complete lack of it. Launching a massive military expedition across continents isn't cheap. These knights needed ships, and who controlled the most powerful naval fleet in the Mediterranean? Venice. The wealthy maritime republic was ready to help, but at a staggering price. Imagine the scene: desperate Crusader leaders sitting in negotiation with the cunning Venetian merchants, realizing they couldn't pay the astronomical fees for transportation. But the Venetians, led by the shrewd and ambitious Doge Enrico Dandolo, had a solution, and it was a solution that would change everything. "Can't pay?" the Venetians essentially said. "No problem. We have a proposition for you." Their proposal was both brilliant and morally questionable. Instead of demanding gold, they asked the Crusaders to help Venice settle a score with Zara, a Christian city that had rebelled against Venetian control. Yes, you heard that right. These holy warriors were being asked to attack another Christian city to pay off their naval transport debt. And here's where it gets even more scandalous. Pope Innocent III was absolutely furious. When he heard about the planned attack on Zara, he did something unprecedented. He excommunicated the entire crusading army. Being excommunicated in medieval times was no small matter. It meant being cut off from the church, condemned spiritually, and essentially declared an enemy of God. But did these crusaders stop? Absolutely not. The lure of adventure, the pressure of their massive expedition, and perhaps a healthy dose of political manipulation meant they pressed forward. Zara would fall, and the Crusaders would find themselves deeper and deeper into a mission that looked less and less like a holy war with each passing month. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would lead them to commit one of the most shocking betrayals in Christian history, the sack of Constantinople itself. The Fourth Crusade was rapidly transforming from a sacred mission into something far more complex, a story of ambition, debt, and the dangerous intersection of religious fervor and political manipulation. Now enter a young prince with a desperate plan that would change everything. Alexius Angelos was not your typical royal heir. Stripped of his birthright, exiled from the imperial court, he was a man with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Picture the scene, a brilliant, ambitious young prince who had been pushed aside by his own uncle. While the Byzantine Empire, once the most powerful Christian kingdom in the world, was crumbling from internal conflicts, Alexius saw an opportunity. And that opportunity came in the form of thousands of heavily armed crusaders camped just outside Constantinople. Alexius had a bold and dangerous proposition. He approached the Crusader leaders with a deal that seemed too good to be true. "Help me reclaim my throne," he promised, "and I will pay you an astronomical sum of money, not just enough to cover your expedition costs, but wealth beyond your wildest dreams." To these cash-strapped knights, it sounded like a miracle. Restore a rightful heir to the throne and get paid handsomely. It was an offer that seemed perfect. The Crusaders threw their full support behind young Alexius, helping him overthrow his uncle and claim the imperial throne. But here's where the story takes its most dramatic turn. Promises are easy to make. Keeping them, that's a different story entirely. Once crowned, Alexius quickly realized he couldn't deliver on his extravagant promises. The imperial treasury was nearly empty. The money he had guaranteed the Crusaders, it simply didn't exist. The Crusaders were furious. They had fought hard, risked everything, and now they were being told there would be no payment. What started as a strategic alliance rapidly transformed into a powder keg of tension and betrayal, and then came the moment of no return. If Alexius couldn't pay them in gold, the Crusaders decided they would pay themselves. How? By taking Constantinople itself. A city that had stood for centuries, the jewel of the Christian world, was about to face an enemy unlike any it had seen before. Not foreign invaders, but supposed allies who had been promised wealth and were now ready to take it by force. The stage was set for one of the most shocking betrayals in medieval history. The Crusaders were no longer holy warriors. They had become something else entirely. An army of mercenaries with nothing to lose and everything to gain. On the 12th day of April, in the year 1204, the unthinkable happened. Constantinople, the most magnificent city in the Christian world, was about to experience a nightmare beyond imagination. As dawn broke, the Crusaders launched their attack, but this was no ordinary siege. This was a systematic destruction of a city that had stood as a beacon of civilization for centuries. Imagine the horror, streets filled with smoke, the sound of crackling flames, the terrifying screams of civilians, and the clash of metal against metal. These were not invaders from a foreign land, but fellow Christians. Knights who had taken sacred vows, who wore the cross, were now becoming the very monsters they had sworn to fight against. They didn't just attack, they utterly decimated the city. Churches burned, priceless artifacts were destroyed, homes were ransacked, no place was sacred, no treasure was safe. And here's a detail so shocking it almost defies belief. Historians report that prostitutes were brought into the Hagia Sophia, the greatest cathedral of Eastern Christianity, and danced on its sacred altar. Let that sink in for a moment. The most holy of holy places, desecrated in the most grotesque manner possible. But the destruction wasn't just about violence, it was about pure, unbridled greed. These Crusaders stole everything they could carry, and I mean everything. Bronze horses, priceless religious artifacts, royal treasures, nothing was off limits. Speaking of those bronze horses, did you know the Crusaders literally ripped bronze statues from monuments? Entire bronze horses were stolen and transported back to Venice, where they would become symbols of this horrific conquest. This wasn't just a battle. This was a complete and total annihilation of a civilization. The city that had been the heart of Christian culture for hundreds of years was now reduced to burning ruins. Families were torn apart, centuries of culture were destroyed, and the Byzantine Empire would never recover from this betrayal. But here's a question for you. Were these Crusaders heroes or villains? Would you call them holy warriors or nothing more than common thieves wearing the mask of religious devotion? If you're loving this deep dive into one of history's most shocking moments, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with your friends and subscribe to the Medieval Archives. Drop a comment below. We want to hear what you think about this incredible story of betrayal and destruction. But the story doesn't end with the destruction of Constantinople. This single moment of betrayal would echo through centuries, changing the course of world history forever. The Byzantine Empire, once the most powerful Christian kingdom in the world, was now a shadow of its former self. Imagine a mighty lion, wounded and bleeding, waiting for its final blow. And that blow would come nearly 250 years later, in 1453, when the Ottoman Empire would finally conquer what remained of this once great civilization. The sack of 1204 wasn't just a single violent moment. It was a fatal wound that would slowly bleed the Byzantine Empire to death. The Crusaders had done more damage than any external enemy could have dreamed possible. They had destroyed the heart of their own Christian world. And the treasures? Oh, the treasures tell a story of their own. Venice, the mastermind behind much of this destruction, became the greatest beneficiary of this cultural massacre. The famous bronze horses of St. Mark's Basilica? They weren't Venetian at all. These magnificent statues were stolen directly from Constantinople, transported across the Mediterranean as trophies of this brutal conquest. Picture these incredible bronze horses, which had stood as symbols of Byzantine grandeur for centuries, now prancing across the facade of a Venetian church. Each horse was a testament to a stolen history, a piece of cultural heritage violently ripped from its home. But the losses went far beyond bronze statues. Priceless manuscripts were burned. Incredible works of art were destroyed or stolen. Entire libraries of knowledge were lost forever. The Crusaders didn't just attack a city. They attacked an entire civilization's memory. This wasn't just a military defeat. This was a cultural extinction. The Byzantine Empire, which had preserved Greek and Roman knowledge through the darkest periods of medieval Europe, was now critically wounded. Its power, its influence, its very identity was stripped away. And here's the most tragic irony of all. These were Christian knights who claimed to be fighting for a holy cause. Yet they destroyed the most important Christian city in the Eastern world, weakening Christianity itself in the process. The sack of Constantinople would ultimately pave the way for the rise of the Ottoman Empire. The weakened Byzantine state would struggle for another 250 years before finally falling, a direct consequence of this incredible betrayal. A single moment of greed, a single decision to break sacred oaths, and an entire civilization would never be the same again. But what if I told you that the entire conquest was nothing more than an elaborate chess game, a cold, calculated plan orchestrated by one of the most cunning political minds of the medieval world? Enter Enrico Dandolo, the Doge of Venice. This was no ordinary politician. He was a masterful strategist, a man who could see 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still figuring out the game board. Dandolo wasn't just old, he was nearly blind. But what he lacked in eyesight, he made up for with an absolutely brilliant and ruthless mind. Some historians believe he was the true puppet master behind the entire Fourth Crusade. Imagine the scene. Venice was a trading powerhouse, but Constantinople was its biggest commercial rival. This wasn't just a competition, it was an existential threat to Venetian economic dominance. And Dandolo had a plan to eliminate that threat once and for all. He didn't want to just defeat Constantinople. He wanted to destroy it completely. Using the Crusaders as his unwitting tools, Dandolo manipulated an entire holy mission. These knights thought they were fighting for religious reasons, but they were actually playing out a sophisticated economic strategy. Every move, every decision was carefully orchestrated to weaken Constantinople. The Crusaders were like pieces on a chessboard, moved precisely by Dandolo's strategic hand. They believed they were fulfilling a divine mission, when in reality they were executing a brilliant commercial revenge. Think about the audacity. A blind old man in Venice managed to convince thousands of knights to attack a Christian city, destroy a millennium-old empire, all to protect Venetian trade interests. It sounds like something out of a Hollywood movie, but this was real history. Dandolo would not live to see the full fruits of his manipulation, but his plan worked perfectly. Venice would emerge from this conquest as the dominant commercial power in the Mediterranean, with Constantinople permanently weakened. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a masterclass in political manipulation. So here we are, at the end of one of history's most shocking betrayals. The Fourth Crusade, a mission that began with the noblest of intentions, became a brutal testament to human weakness. What started as a sacred journey to liberate holy lands became something far darker. These were not heroes. They were not holy warriors. They were opportunists who used religion as a mask for their deepest, most destructive impulses. Constantinople was more than just a city. It was the heart of the Christian world, a bridge between East and West. And in one brutal moment it was torn apart, not by external enemies, but by those who claimed to be its protectors. This is a story that reminds us how easily noble intentions can be corrupted, how power and greed can transform people, how the most sacred of missions can become the most terrible of atrocities. The Byzantine Empire would never recover. The Christian world would remain divided for centuries, and all because of a handful of men who chose gold over God, revenge over righteousness. But history is not just about what happened. It's about what we learn from it. Every time we see power manipulated, every time we witness people using faith as a weapon, we can trace it back to moments like these. The sack of Constantinople is more than a historical event. It's a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition, a warning about how easily we can justify the most terrible acts when we believe we are right. If you've been fascinated by this incredible story, if you want to dive deeper into the hidden dramas of medieval history, you know what to do. Hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a good historical thriller, and make sure to subscribe to the Medieval Archives, where we bring the most incredible stories of human complexity to life. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history is always more complicated than it seems.